Chapter 10. Barely Alive. In the 4 days he and his friends had been at the hospital, so much, yet not at all, had happened. Events mostly came in the form of news, at least while all of his friends were still asleep, having the privilege of getting settled slowly and gently back into their bodies. He visited them when he could, watching videos and movies and shows from a massive archive of saved media, or typing in the Notes app on the phone that Makoto had allowed him to keep. First, his once dead classmates. All 10 of them had been extracted from the simulation with no complications and had been sent to the hospital with the rest of them. This was yesterday, so they were all still asleep and needing to be constantly monitored. They were set to wake up within the week, if everything went well. And just like him, their appearances were different as well, ranging from Gonta's no difference at all to Ryoma being a whole few feet taller. At least, they still looked like themselves. Second, his survivor friends. All of them were expected to wake up any day now, though there was no telling what they would and wouldn't remember from everything. They had been changed out of those school uniforms and into hospital gowns, much like Shuichi was at first, which he was ashamed to admit had been a whole fiasco. He was wearing actual clothes now, but those had not been a fun few days, so at least they'd hopefully wake up comfortable. If not, Shuichi was prepared to rush into any room he had to explain everything to his friends. Third, the ward he and his friends were in was a high-security part of the hospital that simultaneously served as a psychiatric hospital. Upon his explorations, which he did when he was trying to avoid the staff, they were nice, but they just made him feel lonelier, in a sense. He discovered things, like an art room with both supplies for artwork and even music, which he was sure Angie and Kaede would love. There was a recreation room with games and books, and a cafeteria. It would serve all right until Future Foundation found somewhere more livable for them to stay. Fourth, and finally, Team Danganronpa. That was what the scare group that hosted the killing game. With a little background digging, Kyoko had been able to unearth where they all came from and what memories they were missing. When Shuichi had asked her about those memories, she had said that they weren't things any of them needed to know, except maybe Tsumugi, so that was a little worrying. Anyhow, Kyoko had a small team of her own, investigating Team Danganronpa's actions and whereabouts, though the detective herself had said that there was a chance that Team Danganronpa had disbanded due to what was potentially infighting. She also confirmed that Tsumugi was not a part of that group, so the mastermind role had been chosen for her against her will. Shuichi had been right on that front, so at least Tsumugi wasn't going to be arrested. Kyoko assured him over the phone that he wouldn't need to worry about Team Danganronpa ever again, though. She told him to put all his focus into recovering. Shuichi wasn't sure how to take that, so he agreed with her, and their phone call ended. In all honesty, focusing on recovery was the least of his worries. He knew that he was fine. He had a physical therapist help him out for a bit, and although his legs gave him trouble sometimes, it wasn't nearly as impossible to move as it had been before. Resting made him want to pull his hair out, since laying down and doing nothing reminded him of his days in bed during the time loop, and he never wanted to feel that awful again. Instead, he rested by sitting with his sleeping friends, playing on his phone, or even napping. Was he doing the same thing as he would be doing if he were just in bed? Yes, but it was different because he was with somebody. The staff wasn't very approving of this habit, but they allowed him to do it so long as he wasn't hurting himself or his friends. Shuichi made sure to be extra careful with himself to avoid being banned from visiting his friends and classmates. Right now, he was sitting with Kaede. He switched classmates every time he finished watching a movie, or when his phone was done charging after he napped, since, in his outfit now, he got some pretty big pockets in his sweatpants, so he could easily fit the long cord and brick as he walked around. Thank God for Future Foundation and their acquisition of a whole lot of ultimates. She was the last person Shuichi hadn't yet visited, mostly since seeing her put a heavy strain on his heart that came from something Kyoko had told him on one of their update calls. According to the program files, Kaede was not the Blackened. She was not executed as a Blackened student. The outcome of that whole class trial had been false, a cover-up by the mastermind, since Kaede's first shot put ball missed Rantaro. Instead, it was Sumugi who had killed him. Maybe if Shuichi had thought just a little harder about the variables, if he had put any thought into searching the girl's bathroom, where Sumugi had disappeared off to. It was too late now. What had happened, happened, and he couldn't do anything to change that. When Kaede woke up, Shuichi wondered how he was going to tell her that. She had died thinking she killed Rantaro. The guilt would undoubtedly carry over when she woke up for the first time. On top of that, she was going to have to deal with the shock of coming back, a feeling Shuichi understood all too well. Dying in the way she had, Shuichi couldn't imagine trying to come back from that. The door to the room opened suddenly, nearly scaring him out of his skin. It looked to be Maki's primary nurse. Ah, right. All of them had an assigned primary nurse who was set to take care of them and keep track of their recovery. The amount of medical staff Future Foundation had on hand was surprising, considering what was happening outside. "There you are," the woman sighed, relaxing for only a moment before tensing again. "Shuichi, we need your help." Shuichi stared at her. "Uh-huh? Why?" "Maki woke up," she grimaced. A shiver of excitement shot down his spine, but judging from the solemn look on the nurse's face, this wasn't yet news to be celebrated. "And she needs to be calmed down. We're hoping you can do that so we don't have to physically restrain her." "Of course!" Shuichi was already out of his seat, pocketing his phone. "Of course I'll help." "Thank God," the nurse whispered in relief, holding her hand against her chest for only a moment before backing out of the doorway. Maki's awake. That fact only truly processed in his head when he was actually entering Maki's room. The last nurse, who had been in the room, slipping out past him. That wasn't who his focus was on, though. His eyes were locked on Maki herself, who looked at him with enough force to kill him on the spot. The choppier way her hair was cut, and the wild look of danger in her glaring red eyes made her look so much less composed than she had been in the killing game, and somehow that made her much scarier. The last time he had truly faced her had been back in the simulation, when she was standing at the end of his gun. She had had her poison-tipped crossbow then, but getting her to discard that was easy when he threatened Kaito. Guilt wormed under his skin as he thought back to that first attempt, the one where he had held his friends hostage until morning. He had shot Kaito with a gun. But that wasn't the point. Since then, Shuichi had only seen her asleep in her hospital bed. Her neutral sleeping expression would be angelic compared to the look on her face now. "Maki?" Shuichi asked, his voice delicately quiet. There was something wrong. He knew. She wasn't in her bed anymore. Her IV was no longer attached to her arm, and she backed away against the wall, like a cornered animal. Maybe he shouldn't approach her right away. It's okay, Maki. What's wrong?" Maki squinted at him, looking him up and down, before recognition flashes across her expression. "Shuichi? Oh, He glanced down at himself. He knew he looked different from the simulation, more girlish. But was it that different? Yeah, Shuichi Saihara. For some reason, the answer seemed to agitate her even more, but at least she wasn't having a borderline panic attack anymore. She scoffed at him in disdain, turning her head so she wouldn't have to look directly at him. You must be wondering what's happening, right? Shuichi continued when she didn't say anything in return. Well, if you remember, the killing game was in a simulation. I know that part. Maki interrupted him snippily. Where are we now? So, this organization called Future Foundation saved us. This is one of their hospitals. Maki looked near murderous. And you let this organization take us? No suspicion or anything? Did the time loop kill all your common sense too? What? No, I made sure they were trustworthy. He left out the part where he would have been totally defenseless against them if they had been evil. I've been here for almost a week, Maki. I promise, they're good people. They gave me a phone, and they call me every day to tell me what's going on back at where we were. They're trying to help us. I promise. A week? Maki seethed. I was unconscious for a week? Technically, longer. Shuichi riskily admitted. We were asleep when we were in the simulation too. So, based on Kyoko's deductions, at least 3 weeks? That didn't seem to help. How long have we been here? Here? Here. The hospital. Maki threw her hand towards the bed. Or, more accurately, the machines. How long have we been in this hospital? Oh, 4 days. 4 days. Maki repeated under her breath. Well, you look fine, aside from the fact that you look like a girl. Okay. Ouch. That comment stung a lot more than he would have liked it to. It's hard to tell if your head is okay, though, considering you were acting like an idiot in the simulation, too. Maki continued unhappily. What were you thinking? What reason did you have to point a gun at us? You almost shot Kaito. I didn't want to, Shuichi protested. And then you leave the simulation and don't tell anyone what's going on? Maki barreled on, making his jaw click shut. You had no reason to do everything you did. If you had explained everything, I wouldn't have shot Kaito or Kokichi. You would believe I was in a time loop? Shuichi demanded incredulously, knowing perfectly well that wasn't true. I might have, if you explained the simulation part, she snapped. If you had the answers, why not tell us? If you were going to destroy Monokuma and not the mastermind anyway, you wouldn't have needed to worry about them stopping you from leaving, because we would have helped you. Instead, you locked me and Kaito in the bathroom overnight, and then you drugged and handcuffed Kokichi. None of us knew what was going on until Kokichi showed us that dubious letter, and even that was hardly any explanation for what you did. You didn't even stay behind to deal with the consequences yourself, because you left the simulation without any of us. Maki, you knew that there was no chance of Team Danganronpa waiting for you. Monokuma told you that himself. You were being selfish when you left alone. Selfish? Shuichi echoed, in utter disbelief. I was trying to protect you. Nothing was for certain while I was leaving. I just wanted all of you to be safe. Maki rolled her eyes. How were you planning to wake us up, anyway? If it wasn't for this Future Foundation, you would have been useless. You abandoned all of us based on a maybe. If you were so worried about Kokichi being killed, why didn't you take him with you? If you were so uncertain about facing Team Danganronpa, why didn't you take me or Kaito with you? And why do you suddenly care about us now? You clearly didn't before. It was hard to form a response to that, whether that was because his throat had closed up, or he genuinely didn't know how to refute her. He didn't know. The words didn't come out either way. There was a small knock on the wall next to the door. It was Maki's primary nurse, who was leaning into the room with a concerned pinch in her brows. "Excuse me? We'd like to examine you now that you're awake," the nurse informed her. "We are just staff from Future Foundation. We've been assigned to help you all." Though she didn't look happy about it, she at least didn't seem like she was going to fight them anymore. Even if she was angry at Shuichi, she at least believed him. Angry? Maki's angry? At me? "Whatever," Maki grumbled. "One wrong move, though, and I break your fingers." Her primary nurse shrugged, fully stepping into the room. "Fine by me. Also, I want him out." Her red eyes sharpened into a glare once again as she looked at him. "I don't want to see him right now." "Why?" he wanted to ask. "Why are you mad at me? How do I fix it?" "Sorry," was the only thing Shuichi could choke out. He backed up a step, murmuring another apology as he fully turned towards the door. "I hope you feel better, Maki." Maki didn't say anything back as he slunk out the door, feeling strangely numb. Maki could be a bit cold to him sometimes. She was cold to everyone. He had seen her angry before, but she had never been angry at him. Her anger turned that cold chill into a searing flame, burning quietly and angrily. It was like a candle in a dark room. No matter where you turned, you'd always see its light. Shuichi didn't know how to handle when people were angry at him. It wasn't like he ever did much to make people angry. At least, not on purpose. The only ones who ever got truly mad at him were his past babysitters and teachers, who would basically just yell at him until he either cried or, more rarely, fixed whatever it was that he did wrong. That didn't happen nowadays. He went out of his way to try to avoid making people mad. But when it did happen, he wasn't quite sure what to do. Growing up, people yelled at him when he messed up, and maybe sometimes they'd even get a little physical. That was anger to him. During the killing game, Kaito had been mad at him. He still wasn't entirely sure why, since he had done the exact same thing as the previous 3 times. The only difference that time was that it was Kokichi who declared the culprit, not him. He didn't know why he'd be at fault for that, but Kaito had let it go? Probably. All he had said when he tried to bring it up was, "I leave the rest to you." So, Shuichi really didn't know what was up with that. But if Kaito wasn't mad at him, then he was fine with it. With the time loop, too, Kokichi had been pissed at him in that one loop, but that was pretty short-lived. He brought his hand to the side of his neck. He didn't want to think about that one. "Shuichi?" one of the nurses asked him. He wasn't a primary caretaker or anything. He was just someone who helped everyone out equally. Pretty nice guy. "Are you okay?" Yes, I'm fine," Shuichi reassured him quickly. Maki's anger was new and quiet, which, while it was scary, was justified. She was mad at him because of the actions he took to end the time loop. He didn't expect her to forgive him by any means. "I just, I'm glad she's awake. And, I... Don't cry. Oh, God, don't cry." He chastised himself, blinking hard. He might not be allowed near his other friends upon their awakening if Maki made him cry. "I just want to cut my hair," he told the nurse, offering him a tiny, shaky smile. "I don't want to look like a girl." The nurse blinked, staring at him a bit intently. All right. I'll talk to your prime about that. Do you want me to take you back to your room?" If there was anything Shuichi didn't want to be right now, It was alone. "No, I'm gonna go visit one of my friends. Is there any chance I can see Kibo?"
"He still won't allow visitors."
"Figures," Shuichi sighed. K1B0 had been awake for a while now, but he had banned visitors pretty much instantly out of fear of hurting somebody. He was pretty paranoid about Team Danganronpa. "Okay, I'll probably be with Kaito. Sorry, I'm worried."
"That's fine. Just be careful."
The nurse gave him a small nod before letting him go on with his business. With a small exhale, Shuichi started towards his newfound destination. There was a notes app on his phone. At this point, marking 5 days since his arrival at the hospital, there had to be hundreds of words in that app, detailing all of his emotions and everything he had gone through. Notes about the killing game, the time loop, his family, his friends. Every thought and every feeling he had was all contained in this little phone. He was laying his soul bare in this thing, which meant that should anyone see this, they would probably know him better than he knew himself. With these written feelings also came news. News of Future Foundation's progress. News of his friend's recovery. Everyone was getting better. Himiko had woken up, but she wasn't entirely there yet. Maki was already up and walking around, which he found very surprising, considering the pathetic state he had personally been in upon waking up for the first time. K1B0 was still isolating himself, but Kaito and Kokichi were set to wake up any day now. "Shuichi, we need you!" Which turned out to be today. "What is it?" Shuichi asked, as he hopped out of his chair. He had been sitting with Ryoma, who had yet to show any signs of awakening. The nurse who had fetched him looked anxious. "Kokichi's awake. If you can't handle it, that's all right, but I thought I'd give you the chance." "Yes!" he blurted out eagerly. He didn't mean to interrupt them, but Kokichi. "Yes, I'll help." "Are you sure?" the nurse asked him, as he rushed out of the room, almost tripping and slamming into the wall amidst his rush. "Be careful!" Shuichi threw a distracted apology over his shoulder as he hurried down the hall, moving towards where he knew Kokichi's room was. The doorway was significantly less crowded this time. Compared to Maki's collection of concerned staff, there were only 2 people standing there. That in itself would be fine, if he couldn't hear so much shouting coming from inside the room. That should have been his first warning sign, the first red flag in this situation. When Shuichi entered the room, he saw Kokichi's primary nurse holding him against the bed, an endless stream of reassurances and calm pleas for him to calm down coming from her mouth. In comparison, Kokichi was anything but calm. He was thrashing around as if someone had set him on fire, shouting borderline incomprehensible profanities at the poor woman so loudly his voice was breaking. "Kokichi!" Shuichi exclaimed, a burst of adrenaline making him lunge towards the bed. It looked like his primary nurse was doing her damn best not to let Kokichi rip out his IV or hurt himself, which she was doing a great job at admittedly, but consequently scaring the shit out of him. "You're going to tear your stitches! Please stop fighting!"
"Damned if I do, damned if I don't,"
he heard Kokichi's primary nurse curse under her breath.
"I'm leaving the room. I'm the one scaring him. Calm down, kid."
That was all she left him with, before she removed her hands from Kokichi's arm and chest, causing him to nearly fling himself out of bed. As she hurried out of the room, he immediately sat up, breathing so hard it was a wonder he was still conscious. Immediately, he went to tear out his IV. "Kokichi!" Without thinking, Shuichi seized his wrist, stopping him in place. "I promise, it's okay!" And wouldn't you know it, Kokichi punched him in the face. The surprise hurt more than the actual blow did, honestly. Kokichi's movements were jerky and stiff, and given the fact that he was afflicted with something called severe acute malnutrition, upon coming out of the simulation, it made sense his punches would be lacking. Still, though, it was hard to be offended when Kokichi looked like he was on the verge of tears, though. That was also the moment that he realized that, wow, Kokichi's eyes were gorgeous. One was his usual purple, but the other was yellow. How intriguing. Not important, though. Kokichi, he realized, was having a panic attack. It was strange to see Kokichi in such a vulnerable state. Shuichi had never seen him actively panic like this before. Not the kind of silent, hyperventilating state of hysteria. The closest example he could think of was when he had committed suicide in front of him in that one loop, and Kokichi had been frantically trying to save him. "You're safe, Kokichi. I promise," Shuichi reassured him in a soft voice. "You're not in the simulation anymore. We're at a hospital, protected by an organization called Future Foundation, who helped all of you get out, too." Kokichi squeezed his eyes shut, using his free hand to shakily try and hide his tears. He was leaning away from Shuichi, as far as he could get, with Shuichi gripping his wrist. "Our bodies are different from how they were in the simulation," Shuichi continued, in the quiet, firm voice he had adopted. "Your body was severely malnutritioned when they got you out, and you had an untreated wound on your back that the people out there took care of. They're doctors, Kokichi. They're helping you." That wound was something Shuichi had wondered about a lot. He had seen it for himself after it was stitched. It was a horrific, long scar that ran down the length of his spine, which had been uncomfortably visible against his skin. Kokichi's body was very bony now, and he was somehow even smaller than before. Maybe that was because he wasn't actively trying to make himself bigger, but it could also be because he had been apparently starved. Answers to what happened to them during the tragedy was one of the first things Future Foundation wouldn't give him, though, so he dropped it. If his friends remembered, then they'd deal with it together. But otherwise, some things were better off left forgotten. "They're waiting outside the room, so it's just us. No one is going to hurt you." Shuichi lessened his grip on Kokichi's wrist, but didn't release him entirely. "I'm not hurt, am I?" At least, Kokichi looked at him this time. He glanced him up and down, his eyes searching for any sign of injury. It was quiet for a few moments, filled only with the sound of Kokichi's heavy breathing. Shuichi let the silence fester. He said what he needed to, and, as much as he wanted to help Kokichi, he doubted Kokichi would want him to guide him through his breathing. He didn't like when people told him what to do, after all. After a little while, when Kokichi didn't look pale enough to pass out, he opened his mouth. No words came out at first, especially when his gaze fixated on the IV in his arm. But then finally, "What are they putting inside of me?" "Fluids, to keep you hydrated," Shuichi clarified honestly. "And pain medicine." "Why didn't they?" Kokichi trailed off, opting to instead point helplessly at his mouth. "The tube thing." "How you've been eating?" Shuichi guessed, which earned a small nod from Kokichi. "Well, you've all been waking up from time to time. You get to eat then." Kokichi closed his eyes, releasing a trembling breath. "But now that you're awake, you can eat properly," Shuichi continued, in a mild attempt to reassure him. "I'm really happy you're awake, Kokichi." "They didn't give me one of those 'cause they knew I was gonna freak, didn't they?" Kokichi asked, in barely a whisper. "The tubes." Shuichi hadn't thought about that. The only reason he knew no one had gotten a feeding tube of any kind was because they were going to wake up soon. But if it was also because they'd wake up swinging and the staff wanted to avoid them hurting themselves, then Shuichi wouldn't be surprised. "Maybe?" he risked answering. "It's, possible?" "I know I'm right," Kokichi murmured, and if it weren't for the unusual delicacy in his voice, he would have sounded like his normal self. Ah, at least you're thinking clearly then. Shuichi let out his own breath of relief. Reassured that he wasn't going to hurt himself, he let go of Kokichi's wrist. The little tension left in Kokichi's shoulders slipped away, and he brought his hand to his eyes, hiding them once again. Shuichi could understand why. Kokichi was someone who hid his true self under layers and layers of masks and lies. To be stripped of those defenses so abruptly couldn't have done any favors for his panic attack. It took a little longer for Kokichi to lower his hand. His eyes were clear again when he did, betraying nothing on how he truly felt in the moment. Usually, that would have put off Shuichi. Eyes were something he still struggled with, and people like Kokichi and Maki's eyes, so secretive and cold, were hard to look at sometimes. But Kokichi's eyes, even with the hidden truths that lay beneath them, oh, they were beautiful. He had never seen someone with heterochromia before, and he had to wonder why Team Danganronpa would hide something that was so pretty. Shuichi didn't want to hide from his gaze. He wanted more of it. He wanted to look into Kokichi's eyes, where he found comfort and beauty, instead of anxiety and guilt. He wanted Kokichi to look at him forever. Your haircut is great, Kokichi commented, after a long lapse of silence, quickly jerking Shuichi out of his dreamy trance. Huh? Oh, thank you. Wait. Shuichi frowned. Is that a lie? No, I just said it 'cause it's rude to stare, Kokichi replied cheerily. His voice was still soft, yes, and lacking the Kokichi-typical hyper-energy that came with his more light-hearted banner. But it was still Kokichi, and that was fine. But also, sorry. Shuichi dropped his gaze to the ground, feeling his face heat up in embarrassment. Sorry. Kokichi didn't respond to that. He just stared at where the window would be, privacy curtains shielding them from the view of the hallway. You can leave, Kokichi told him, after another few minutes. You don't have to stay. Shuichi felt his heart plummet in his chest. Do you not want me to stay? He breathed, his voice weak. He didn't want to hear the answer, but he had to ask. He needed to know. Not right now, Kokichi replied dryly. I appreciate the company or whatever, but I just want to be alone. The chances that Kokichi was lying were slim. He did look sincerely exhausted, even if he had only just woken up. He'd have to deal with his primary nurses right after this, so that was going to be even more draining. No matter how much Shuichi wanted to stay with him, his presence was unwanted, and he was just making things worse. Shuichi! Kokichi's smile was sweet as he turned to face him. I am really, really mad at you right now. Shuichi's chest hurt. Kokichi's anger could be visible so long as he wanted to be. If he was mad at you, chances were you'd know. But that wasn't the only case. Sometimes, Kokichi's anger would be buried deep beneath his lies, occasionally prodding the subject of his fury with hints and sharp remarks. Could it be that Kokichi was mad at him too? Like Maki? Shuichi shuffled a step back, scanning Kokichi's face. He wasn't looking at him. In fact, it looked like he was avoiding his gaze. Okay, he finally choked out. Okay, I understand. You don't want me around. Hiding the quiver in his voice was hard, and maybe Kokichi heard it, because he gave Shuichi a look. Wow, is Shuichi gonna cry over being rejected? Kokichi teased softly, making me feel bad when I already feel like shit is pretty mean, you know. I'm sorry. Please, don't be mad at me. Yeah,
Sorry. I'll go. I hope you feel better. Again, Kokichi was quiet. It was eerie. Kokichi was never this quiet. He must be feeling pretty awful if he was flat out telling Shuichi to go away. That was that then. Shuichi left the room, keeping his head ducked low, as he told Kokichi's primary nurse she could go in. One of the other people there, a doctor, tried to ask him if he was okay, but he nodded and hurried off. He didn't want to talk to anyone right now. Maki's mad at me. She doesn't even want to see me. Shuichi's eyes burned as he picked up the pace. He wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere alone. Kokichi's mad at me. He doesn't want me around either. No, he was just tired. He's dealing with a lot, and sometimes people need to be alone. It's selfish to assume he's mad at you just because he asked you to go away. The sting in his cheek from Kokichi's punch was suddenly hurting a lot worse now. He didn't apologize for that. He was having a panic attack. He probably didn't even recognize me. How could he? He was scared. Everyone is. He didn't say sorry for hitting me. Shuichi practically stumbled into the art room. The back of his eyes were burning, and he needed somewhere quiet to sit. He wanted these unwanted thoughts out of his head. The weight of his phone in his coat pocket bumped against his hip as he stopped moving, looking for a more comfortable place to sit. Ah, my notes! I have to write this down. He fumbled for his phone and realized that his hands were shaking as he turned it on. Okay, this helped. His thumbs moved rapidly across the virtual keyboard as he typed, pacing in short circles around the empty room. Having somewhere to flood all of his thoughts and complicated feelings definitely alleviated some of the strain on his lungs. It grounded him in a way, seeing his words gaze back at him. They weren't neat and they weren't coherent, but they were his, and that's why Shuichi didn't cry. The minute Kaito woke up, it was like the entire hospital came to life. Upon his awakening, he didn't miss a single beat before he dragged his poor primary nurse around to collect all of his friends. The only reason he came was because Kaito had threatened to walk out and do it himself, and it'd be trouble if he collapsed in the middle of the hallway. Between the effects the virtual illness had on his real body and a pre-existing ailment in his lungs, which had not been explained to Shuichi, he was still pretty weak. But even if his body was weak, Kaito sure wasn't going to let that stop him. Oh no, that was like trying to stop an airplane going with your bare hands. Shuichi was the last one he found, though that was probably because Shuichi was pretty much never in his own room. Either way, he was pretty surprised when he saw Kaito burst through the door, considering he was sitting in Kyo's room. "What, Kaito?" he asked in shock, briefly wondering if he was having some loneliness-induced fever dream, until he saw Kaito's exasperated primary nurse enter the room as well. "Shuichi!" Kaito had yelled upon seeing him, and had immediately walked over, stumbled, more like, to him, patting him firmly on the shoulder. "We're all meeting in the cafeteria, and we need you." "What? You're awake? When?" 15 minutes ago. Now, come on before I carry you there myself." That was how Shuichi found himself in the cafeteria, with his 5 other fellow survivors, Sansamuki. Even K1B0 was there. Leave it to Kaito to draw someone out of their shell. "Shuichi!" Kokichi cheered when he entered, taking one eager step forward and immediately tripping. Miraculously, K1B0 caught him, keeping him upright. "Careful!" K1B0 warned him, quickly snatching his hands back when Kokichi recovered. "Don't go making any sudden movements."
"Yeah, you have to approach him slowly," Himiko added. "Or else you'll scare him, and he'll run away."
"I think that's for cats,"
K1B0 pointed out. Cats, Shuichi. Same thing. Kokichi waved him off. He's obviously 3 cats in a trench coat. That's why he's wearing that thing. The coat Shuichi was wearing was brown and casual. He had chosen it from the selection of clothing Future Foundation had initially supplied him with because of its deep pockets, making it easier to carry around his phone and charger. It certainly wasn't a trench coat, though.
Should you be walking around?
Maki asked the astronaut flatly. It looked like she had gotten her own change of clothes, no longer having to wear a hospital gown everywhere. Himiko had as well, but Kokichi and Kaito hadn't yet gotten that opportunity.
You look like hell.
There's only so much you can do for yourself in a hospital, Kaito pointed out with a small shrug. You look great, Maki Roll, but what happened to your hair?
That's what I was asking,
Himiko agreed.
It's all short. I like the pigtails.
Maki puffed out her cheeks, subconsciously turning her head.
It'll grow back. It's just hair.
I hope it does. It suited you great. Kaito sighed, sheepishly rubbing the back of his neck. And Kokichi, what the fuck is up with your eyes?
What? Are you enamored, Kaito? Have you fallen head over heels for me?
Kokichi immediately started teasing him.
Sorry. My heart belongs to someone else.
What? It does?
Himiko yelped. Shut up! I'm just surprised! Kaito snapped. Your eyes are 2 different colors!
Huh?
Kokichi asked. And if Shuichi didn't know any better, he'd say that Kokichi was genuinely surprised there.
Well, your face looks stupider than before, and you sound like a 40-year-old smoker. Also, your dumb goatee is gone.
His what? Kaito's hands flew to feel his chin as Kokichi began snickering, though Shuichi could tell there was little heart in it. Did he really not know about his heterochromia? Is that why he had been so put off by Shuichi's staring? Speaking of which, he couldn't help but notice that Maki hadn't even looked at him yet. She must still be angry at him. But was Kokichi? He had excitedly greeted him. But could that just be an act? Kokichi had always been pretty eccentric in that way. Or maybe he was overthinking this. Maybe he was just being self-centered, and there was nothing actually wrong. His hands itched to have his phone in his hands, to write down his thoughts, but it would be rude to pull it out now.
So, why did you call us all here anyway?
Maki asked Kaito, effectively interrupting his and Kokichi's growing argument.
And where is your primary nurse?
I told him I'd be fine with all of you, Kaito replied with a reassuring thumbs up. If I collapse, then I trust you guys will take care of it. Please don't, Shuichi begged him. He wasn't sure if his heart could take it if any of his friends' healing started regressing. The reason I called you all here is because that's what we've always done, isn't it? Kaito continued, without responding to him. Every morning we gather in the dining hall, so I think we should do that here too.
I thought that was to make sure no one died,
Maki deadpanned. But it also brought us closer, didn't it? K1B0 reasoned, with a pensive expression. Spending so much time with each other was beneficial to our relationships. I agree with Kaito. We should continue to meet up every morning.
That would be nice,
Himiko mused.
I do want to eat breakfast with Tenko. I want to show her and Angie how far I've come.
That is, if she wants to come,
Maki reminded her.
Dying would be difficult for anyone. Being killed by someone would make it even harder.
That's another problem entirely, K1B0 winced. Our classmates killed each other. That isn't something you can simply move past. I wouldn't blame any of them if they didn't want to face their murderer. Or vice versa. Shuichi knew that feeling all too well. He had killed and been killed by the same person and had yet to face her in later loops. Then again, maybe he should consider himself lucky. She was in a separate wing of the hospital, getting the help she needed. And compared to everyone else,
She didn't even remember what she had done to him and what he had done to her. Yeah, he figured. He wasn't able to be compared to his classmates. His situation was much different. "Well, I died loads of times and I'm fine," Kokichi interjected. "I'm not mad at Kaito or Maki, so I think everyone else will live." Shuichi wilted at the same time. Everyone in the room froze. No doubt, they had all been trying to tiptoe around the subject of the time loop and what he had done to end it. Maki especially had tensed, and Kaito was avoiding looking at him or Kokichi. Himiko and K1B0 just looked a little awkward. Also, worth noting, that Kokichi didn't say he wasn't mad at Shuichi. He was definitely overthinking now, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. "You don't remember those times, though." K1B0 took the liberty of breaking the silence. "It's different for everyone else." "Maybe dying so many times permanently impacted my brain," Kokichi suggested, tapping the side of his head. "Subconscious stuff and all of that."
Yeah, wouldn't we have started feeling deja vu if that were the case?
Himiko wondered. "Does it matter?" Maki challenged. "Shuichi ended the killing game. That's all that counts." "He did a pretty good job of it, too!" Kaito exclaimed, giving him a pat on the back that nearly toppled him over. "Your execution was a little, chaotic, but we'll work on that later." Shuichi didn't thank him. He didn't deserve the praise.
When is everyone else gonna wake up?
Himiko asked, thankfully steering the conversation away from the time loop.
And why was Shuichi up before us?
Yeah, he gets to walk around and talk to future Foundation leaders and we don't? Kokichi agreed, with an over-exaggerated pout in Shuichi's general direction. "The way I left the situation was different," Shuichi explained mildly. "I left it on my own. You guys were pulled out. Kyoko and her team had to manually remove a bunch of wires in everyone, which was a lot safer than what I did. She also had to manually load your memories and consciousness back into your bodies. So you had to be unconscious for a while your bodies readjusted to, functioning."
It was a pretty great nap,
Himiko commented. "Then what happened to you?" K1B0 asked him curiously. "If Kyoko hadn't had a team of people to remove us, how did you remove yourself?" I kind of pulled everything out," Shuichi sheepishly admitted, wincing at the alarmed look Kaito shot him. "Kyoko told me that the team programmed a script for when someone left the simulation on their own volition. Their memories and consciousness would be re-uploaded automatically, and the wires sustaining their body disconnect on their own. Moving hurt more than pulling those out." "Ew," Kokichi cringed. "Everybody say thank you, Shuichi, for taking one for the team and not putting us through that." Shuichi looked nervously towards Maki, who was glaring at the smaller boy. "He has to be mocking me," Shuichi figured, trying his best not to appear as dejected as he felt. "He must have figured out Maki's mad at me, and he's rubbing it in my face. I must have made him really mad." Somehow, he was going to have to apologize to them. He just needed to work out what he was going to say. Maki was mad at him for abandoning everyone and going solo, and Kokichi was probably mad at him for pretty much everything. Not only had he drugged him and held him at gunpoint, but he also admitted in his note that he knowingly allowed Kokichi to die over and over. There was also the matter of screwing up Kokichi's important plan. That was also his bad.
"Thanks, Shuichi,"
Himiko said to him, apparently taking the joke seriously and making him feel about 50 times worse. "Thank you, I think," K1B0 concurred. "I have been wanting to ask, what happened after you woke up? I don't remember much from when I first woke up." Ooh, I remember biting someone," Kokichi offered gleefully.
Of course you do,
Maki muttered disbelievingly. Shuichi scrunched up his nose, trying not to let his amusement show.
It's good you don't remember anything. Kyoko said that's supposed to happen.
Shuichi reassured them.
For me, I was awake as soon as my body would let me be. I didn't really have time to give myself to reorient. I looked around for a bit before I started trying to figure out how I was going to try to get you all out.
You left the simulation not even knowing that?
Himiko asked in mild alarm.
Well, no,
Shuichi admitted, with a small, nervous smile.
I was more focused on actually getting out without alerting the mastermind. I, didn't exactly plan ahead very much.
Maki grumbled.
I can tell. It worked out okay in the end, though, didn't it?
K1B0 pointed out lightly. All of us are here.
All of us. Even if only by accident, you found the proper people to help. You saved us.
You saved us. Shuichi wasn't sure why, but those words sent a sharp pang through his heart. That was what he had always been trying to do, wasn't it? Save his friends. His purpose in the time loop was to save Kokichi, Kaito, and Maki. His purpose in the clinic was to save his friends from the simulation. He had done that. They were all safe in the hands of Future Foundation, being treated and tended to by medical professionals. This was exactly what he wanted. So, why did those words hurt so much? Why didn't Shuichi feel like he was done? Everyone was safe. Everyone was as safe as they could possibly be. He saved them.
Don't act like I did anything special,
he pleaded K1B0. That came out a lot.
Don't act like I did anything special,
he pleaded K1B0. That came out sounding a lot ruder than he wanted it to, which he knew threw his friends off guard, based on the looks on their faces.
I didn't even... I did bad things. I didn't save you.
You never actually hurt any of us, Kaito pointed out. I mean, you drugged Kokichi, I guess, but he kind of deserved it.
Kokichi gasped.
Hey, what's that supposed to mean?
But I did hurt you, Shuichi wanted to say. I shot you. I killed Samugi. I hurt Kokichi in so many ways. I told you that in my note. I told everyone. So why are they acting like I did nothing wrong?
If we only persecuted you for doing bad things, that'd just be unfair, K1B0 stated, with a small grimace. I don't blame you for doing what you did, in the same way I don't blame Kaede, Kirumi, Kyo, or Gonta.
I don't know about Kyo,
Himiko mumbled.
That's different, Shuichi insisted, ignoring the girl. I've done bad things you don't even remember. I can't even face the consequences because
Shuichi. Kaito placed a hand on his shoulder, effectively shutting him up.
If you really feel that bad, then I guess you can apologize. But it's really not a big deal. Not a big deal?
Shuichi echoed in disbelief. He slapped Kaito's hand away from him, stepping back.
You don't even remember what I did. I didn't just drug Kokichi or trap you guys in the bathroom or abandon all of you. I did so much worse. I held you hostage at gunpoint. I shot you, Kaito. Aren't you mad?
Well, it didn't actually happen, did it? Kaito shrugged. Time reset. So it's fine. And it's not like you didn't have good intentions. It's messed up, yeah, but you already said sorry in your note. It didn't actually happen. Shuichi stared at him, his mouth agape.
It happened to me,
Shuichi hissed through gritted teeth.
I shot you. I stayed awake all night so you wouldn't kill each other. I killed Samugi, and I'm the one who gave up and let Kokichi die. You're telling me that didn't happen? That it doesn't matter because time reset? Kokichi looked stricken. Everyone else looked flat out uncomfortable. That's not really what I meant, Kaito said after a moment. Of course it happened. I just meant that nothing happened to me, or Makiro, or... He sighed. Kokichi, you already apologized, man. You don't have to freak out about it now. But if I couldn't freak out about it before with you believing me, then when can I? Shuichi wondered, in silent frustration. I don't want to be forgiven. I want him to acknowledge it happened.
I'll forgive you, 'cause the mental image of you with a gun is hilarious,
Kokichi cut in, his hands placed idly behind his head.
Do you have to visualize that?
Himiko asked.
Didn't you see him with one?
Not all night,
Kokichi corrected her with a grin.
I mean, he pointed one at my head for a bit, but we were interrogating Monokuma. Don't we make a great team?
Shuichi almost scoffed and stormed out of the room. He was overjoyed his friends were awake. Don't get him wrong. But if he was going to have to deal with Maki, Kokichi's passive aggressiveness, and general disbelief about what happened in the time loop, then he didn't want to be here. He could talk to everyone when he was feeling a little less sensitive, but now was not that time. The only reason he didn't immediately walk out was because of K1B0. What happened to Shuichi in the time loop was real and valid, and I don't think your method of reassurance is helping, the robot said to Kaito, rolling his eyes. He clearly feels guilty for hurting you, and telling him it's fine isn't going to make him feel better. Let's just move on from the topic and come back to it when Shuichi feels ready for it.
Yeah, let's talk about something nicer,
Himiko agreed, appearing relieved that they were dropping the talk about the time loop.
Like, how should we welcome everyone back? Should we bake a cake for them?
Kaito shot him a thoughtful look, and Shuichi turned his head downwards, unable to meet his gaze. Guilt was worming its way under his skin, even more than it had been before. Kaito had only been trying to help, and Shuichi had gotten defensive and rude. He had made everyone uncomfortable with his own problems, just because Kaito's wording had set him off. There was no way he had been alone in the time loops for so long that he just couldn't handle talking to them. Right? Surely he hadn't turned that unreasonable to the point that something he caused upset him. He's the one who pushed the topic of the time loop, insisting that he did bad things. Kaito had only been responding to that. Was that why Maki and Kokichi were so mad at him? Was it because he also somehow screwed up talking to them when they first woke up too? Thinking back, he didn't think he had hurt their feelings, but the two of them were very good at hiding how they felt. Their anger might just be brewing in silence, and they were waiting for him to apologize. But the topic of conversation had already moved on to their sleeping friends, and what they should do to welcome them back with such limited supplies. There was no way he could apologize now without making the mood plummet again. He separated himself from the group as far as he could, not wanting to participate in the chatter. He didn't want to accidentally start something, especially when even Maki was contributing to the ideas and seeming to be having a generally good time. She was still glancing at Kokichi, as if he dropped babies on their heads for fun, but it seemed like her dislike for him was outweighed by Kaito's cheerful and powerful charm. In just an hour since his awakening, Kaito had successfully reunited everyone. It was clear there were still underlying issues. Kokichi, for one, was someone everyone was avoiding being too close to, and he saw the uncertainty and irritation on his classmates' faces whenever he spoke. There was an open air of discomfort when they all started talking about how they were going to help their classmates readjust to being alive again too, and they thankfully didn't ask Shuichi for any tips. That probably wouldn't go over well. I was worried for nothing,
Shuichi eventually determined. He squeezed his hands together, closing his eyes. They're all fine. They have each other.
You've carried such a heavy burden, but you're not alone, you know? Talking and trusting your friends is the most important thing you can do right now.
But it had already been established they were mad at him, or at the very least, uncomfortable. Maki made it clear she didn't want to see him. Kokichi kept jabbing him with passive-aggressive remarks. Kaito was looking at him every other few minutes with an odd expression. At least K1B0 and Himiko seemed fine, and of course, they were his friends, but they weren't the ones he had trained every night with. They weren't the one who held him in their lap and fed him and pet his hair until he finally fell asleep. I need to apologize. I just want them to hate me less. He stuck his hand in his pocket, closing his fingers around his phone. The urge to pull it out and start writing was almost overwhelming, but that'd be rude. His friends would think he didn't care about what they were saying, or they might think he was disinterested in welcoming all of their other classmates back. I'll apologize to Maki for abandoning everyone, and I'll apologize to Kokichi for everything I did to him in the time loop. Maybe I'll be less defensive then, and I can actually talk to people about the time loop without acting like a jerk. On that note, I'll have to apologize to Kaito too. But in the meantime, he had to get through this meeting, and every other morning meeting. Oh boy. First, he was going to give his apology to Maki, then to Kokichi. He was sitting with Kaede again, as he wrote and deleted what to say in his notes, the stress making him feel a little nauseous. This morning's cafeteria meetup had been so awkward. Maki had tried to talk to him, but he had quickly up and left because he panicked. He didn't know what to say to her yet, or how to explain why he had left the simulation with no one else. That's why he was writing it down, so he knew exactly what he wanted to say. That turned out to be pretty difficult, though, when even he had no idea why he had done it. He did want to protect his friends from the outside world, but that couldn't just be it. Could it? Maki might think he was lying, if that's the only reason he supplied. And as she had pointed out, the actions he took in stopping the time loop were pretty nuts. He didn't know how he was supposed to explain that. Oh yeah, I think I only went so far because I wasn't thinking of you guys as people at the time, because of how predictable your actions had become from the time loop. She might not take that well. Again, he backspaced on what he was initially typing, letting out an exhausted sigh. Maybe he should just get on his hands and knees again. That had startled her out of what she was going to do last time, so maybe the same logic would apply here. Would she accept the explanation that he just wasn't thinking rationally at the time? Maybe I just need to talk to her. Shuichi figured, after a little longer of trying and failing to type something. If I'm talking to her, maybe the words will come as I speak. It'd probably be more authentic that way, too. Okay. Shuichi stood up from his chair, gripping his phone in both hands. I'm going to talk to her. If I don't, I'll just be sitting here forever. And Kaito might also try to do something about it himself, and I really do not want that to happen. Kaede didn't say anything in return, of course. She was still unconscious. But there was hope for her waking up soon. Rantaro was awake, after all. Kind of. He was getting there. Inhaling deeply and trying to hold onto that little confidence he had, he pocketed his phone and walked towards the door. He was going to clear things up with everyone, starting with Maki. All he wanted was for them to understand. First, though, he'd have to find Maki. The hospital available to them wasn't that big, considering, but there were still ways to avoid running into anyone without outright banning visitors, like K1B0 had initially done. He had lifted that ban now, but he still refused to get too close to any of them. Kaito was a miracle worker, he'd tell you. Shuichi knew that, because he had been doing it the minute he realized his Kokichi and Maki were walking around now. He'd rather avoid an awkward confrontation in the hallway. 2 red eyes met his as he opened the door. "Wah!" Shuichi yelped, jumping a good foot into the air in fright.
"So you were here,"
Maki observed.
"Your primary nurse said you might be, but I wasn't sure. You're difficult to find."
Trying to calm his racing heart, Shuichi put a hand on his chest, glancing over his shoulder to make sure he hadn't disturbed Kaede. Seeing as she was still asleep, he turned his attention back to Maki. "Sorry, I was actually, coming to find you," Shuichi admitted quietly. "Why were you looking for me? Does Kaito need something?"
"No, I wanted to talk to you."
Maki was avoiding his gaze, but he didn't feel as though that was because she couldn't stand to look at him. She just appeared more out of her element, in a way.
"It's important."
Important? Did something happen to one of their friends? Shuichi fully stepped into the hall, closing the door behind him. There was no one else around, so it was only him and Maki, finally face to face with each other. He was pretty sure the last time he and her had been alone like this was in the time loop, where he had begged her not to go through with her plan. That felt like it had been an eternity ago, back when everything felt as simple as simply stopping anyone from entering the hangar, and the time loop would end. If only it had been that easy. "What is it?" Shuichi asked her once the door was closed. "Did something happen?"
"Not really. Everything's fine, if that's what you're thinking,"
Maki reassured him.
"Ryoma's waking up, and Tenko's close behind."
Shuichi perked up. "Really? That's great. Himiko's going to be really happy."
"It's going to be exhausting watching those 2 again."
Maki grumbled, though Shuichi knew her well enough to tell she was being affectionate.
"That's not why I wanted to talk to you, though. I've been trying to since yesterday, but you have a habit of disappearing."
"I move around everyone's rooms a lot," Shuichi told her. "Sorry about that, but why?" Maki hesitated again.
"I wanted to say sorry."
It felt like Shuichi's entire brain short-circuited.
"I was harsh on you when I woke up."
Maki continued talking, seemingly oblivious to the way he had frozen.
"More so than necessary. I don't like or approve of what you did. But I also wasn't the one living through the time loop. I doubt I'd act rationally after that long either. I never once thought that you didn't care about us. And I don't think you're selfish. I only said that because you were the closest thing I could take out my frustration and uncertainty on. So, I'm sorry. That was unfair of me."
Shuichi had no idea what to say to that. This wasn't at all how he expected this to go. He was supposed to apologize to her, not the other way around. Shuichi helplessly fumbled over his words, feeling like a broken record. How was he supposed to respond? "It's okay. You deserve to be mad, and you were right. I did act stupidly and carelessly."
"You did,"
Maki agreed bluntly. That's what he appreciated about her, though. She never beat around the bush.
"But I can't stay mad at someone who feels so bad about it. Also, I doubt you'd do something so drastic without a good reason. You're usually more rational than that."
No, Maki." Shuichi shook his head, but he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to tell her he didn't have a good reason. "I could have handled that differently. I just went with what worked best for me, without thinking about anyone else." Maki looked unimpressed.
"Just accept my apology, so you stop acting so sad all the time, and we can hang out again."
I accept your apology?"
"Great."
Maki turned sharply on her heel.
"Kaito wants us all to start training again. Once the doctors clear him, we're going to meet at the rec room every night to train.
Wait, Maki. I want to apologize as well, Shuichi told her before she could leave. She gave him a questioning look over her shoulder, and he scrambled to continue. You were right, and I wanted to say sorry. I hurt you guys, and I don't want to run away from the consequences. I did it before, and I never want to do that again. The look on Kokichi's face didn't make it worth it. Shuichi bent at his waist, bowing. I'm really sorry I left the way I did. I didn't want to have to do another time loop again, so I did the first thing that came to mind that would ensure my own victory. I'm sorry. The halls were quiet, as Maki merely stared at him. Then she turned away, offering him only a plain and simple,
Okay.
It took, admittedly, 2 days for Shuichi to put together a proper apology. Kind of. He actually got a majority of it figured out the evening after he and Maki spoke, but when he went to find Kokichi, it was sort of hard to interrupt him when he was sitting next to Gonta with such a melancholy expression. So he backed out. Fast forward 2 days, which was now the present, and Shuichi was going to do it. He would ask Kokichi at breakfast if he would step aside with him, and he would give him a sincere apology for everything, from drugging him to letting him die. Maybe then Kokichi wouldn't be mad at him, and he could alleviate the anxiety that was weighing him down, enough to the point his primary nurse had asked him about it. He wasn't going to hesitate any longer. He had to do this so he could move on. The first step of his plan was immediately flung out the window when he actually stepped into the cafeteria. Shuichi! Kokichi was the first to call him out, making the wise decision of not lunging out of his chair. Again. About time you showed up. I was starting to think you were avoiding us or something. Shuichi froze as 13 pairs of eyes turned to look at him. Every single one of his classmates were here, some wearing normal clothes, most in their hospital gowns. Some of their primary nurses were present too, standing undisturbed in the corner of the room. But that was less important. There was a delighted gasp as someone leapt out of her chair. He felt as if his entire world had been jerked to a stop as he locked eyes with Kaede. Kaede. He had never seen her eyes in full, but here she stood before him now. Her eyes were brilliantly pink. Shuichi! Kaede shouted, and before he knew it, he was engulfed in a tight hug. I was wondering when you'd show up. I was so excited to see you. Can you believe this? I'm alive! It's incredible! Yeah, Shuichi agreed, dazed, to be hugged by Kaede. Oh, she was so warm. He awkwardly hugged her back, hiding his face in her shoulder. It was all rushing back to him now, just how much he had missed her. Yeah, it's amazing. Come on, don't sound so sad. Kaede scolded him lightly. It's like you're disappointed I'm back or something. No. I'm really glad. Shuichi rushed to correct himself. It's just, well, I wasn't expecting everyone to be here. Not everyone, Kirumi stated. She looked uncomfortable from her seat beside Maki, and he didn't fail to notice that Ryoma was on the opposite end of the table from her. Tsumugi is absent. Yeah, Tsumugi. Right. Kaito winced. Well, now that Shuichi's here... Did we have to wait for Shuichi? Kokichi complained. He already knows, doesn't he?
It just feels more fitting to have all of us here,
Himiko said. There were practically stars in Tenko's eyes. Right on, Himiko! Wow, you're even more incredible now!
Thanks. My max MP has gone up by 3 points.
3? Tenko gasped. Kaede released him from her embrace, much to his disappointment.
Well, can you tell us now?
The pianist asked, placing her hands on her hips.
Where's Samugi? Don't tell me she's...
The one who actually killed Rantaro? The one who framed you? The mastermind. Everyone turned to look at the green-haired boy, who was still wearing that chillingly mysterious smile. He didn't seem too bothered by the notion, but he wasn't the only one in this room, burying how they felt for the sake of the group. Samugi had to have been the mastermind, Rantaro clarified. That means she was the one who hit me.
Huh?
Kaede went pale, and everyone exchanged looks with one another.
No! Rantaro,
Shuichi put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and she leaned into his side. It surprised him for a moment, but he was happy to comfort her. Honestly, I'm surprised I was the first one dead, Rantaro admitted, with a small sigh. There was a bitter note to his words, but he quickly smoothed it over as he continued. It seems like the kind of thing a mastermind would do. Give me too much information, then kill me off before I can tell any of you.
But Samugi's the mastermind,
Himiko pointed out. Samugi mastermind? Gonta whispered, speaking for the first time. His voice sounded rough, as if he had been crying. But Samugi, so nice! She's the mastermind, Shuichi verified grimly. She killed Rantaro. All of the survivors shot him a questioning look, while Kaede only shook her head.
No, really, you don't have to pretend. Rantaro...
Kaede took a deep breath, though her voice was shaking.
I'm the one who killed you.
You did? Rantaro asked, lifting a brow.
I meant to kill the mastermind, but you got caught in my trap instead.
Kaede continued.
I'm so sorry, Rantaro. I never meant to...
Oh, so that's what that was, Rantaro realized, interrupting her. You mean the shot put ball that fell from the top of the bookshelf? You did that? Kaede nodded weakly. So it turns out I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, Rantaro mused. I guess that's also fitting, but don't feel so bad about it. Such a sad face doesn't suit you. Actually, your shot put ball missed. Rantaro may as well have just set off a bomb, because the whole room exploded.
Are you serious? You're telling me that first shitty fucking trial was a fucking sham the whole time?
You're kidding?
Oh, so Atura really did protect Rantaro and Kaede. How divine!
Huh? Kaede died for no reason then? So, Kaede was falsely executed? Oh man, that's pretty mooring. Quit saying stupid stuff, you degenerate! A girl was killed for no reason! Kaede looked a little dizzy. Shuichi did feel bad for her. Finding out in this way must be pretty jarring. So, the whole killing game continued based on a rule violation, Ryoma observed with a hum. His voice was a little less deeper than before, just more scratchy. That's pretty unfair. The killing game as a whole was unfair, Maki pointed out dryly. It really makes you wonder, Kokichi sighed, shooting Shuichi a knowing look. How'd you know about that, Shuichi? You didn't look surprised at all, for such a big, shocking twist. Oh, yeah. Kokichi was still pissed at him.
You knew?
Kaede stepped away from him, her eyes wide.
How long did you know?
Shuichi lifted his hands innocently. I only found out because of Kyoko. Your user in the simulation was never listed as the Blackened. Wait, you do know Kyoko, right?
My nurse explained the simulation to me, yeah. Kyoko Kirigiri was in charge of getting all of us out of it,
Kaede confirmed.
But I really thought I killed Rantaro. I thought... Aren't you mad at me?
She turned back to Rantaro.
I mean, even if I missed,
I'm upset that you tried, Rantaro told her. But I don't hold anything against you. It's not like you were trying to kill me. It was a killing game, designed to influence us to kill each other, K1B0 said, with a significant look at Kirumi, Kyo, Mew, Kokichi, and Maki. It'd be unfair to hold that against any of you when we were all in a terrible situation overall. You don't have to forgive anyone, Kaito added. I'm still pretty pissed at Kokichi for all the shit he pulled, but none of us are going to get better if we stew in our regrets. Angie hummed, with an idle smile on her face, her hands clasped together.
I will consult with Atua first. You did something quite unholy, Kyo. That is not something Atua forgives so easily.
Kyo looked impressively uncomfortable beneath the medical mask he was wearing.
But, I will be civil, Angie continued. Atua does not call for me to be so hateful.
Are we sure he isn't gonna pull some shit like that again? Mew demanded sharply. He was a fucking serial killer. Shouldn't we lock his ass up?
I don't want to make any more friends for my sister, Kyo admitted in a delicate, soft whisper. I'm going to consult a therapist once this is over. I want to know why she did that. An exorcism, Shuichi remembered, as uncomfortable as that whole trial had been, especially with the revelation of Kyo's relationship with his sister. There had to be some underlying issue there that had caused that to happen in the first place. Therapy would do him good. Maybe he'd finally realize what was so wrong about his situation. Hey, good on you, man, Kaito praised him. And if you try any more messed up things like that, we'll whack you back into reality. Though Kyo didn't say anything, Shuichi thought he looked content with that. Well, I don't trust him, Tento declared flatly. One wrong step, and I'm going to Neo-Aikido you into the afterlife after the afterlife. That exists? K1B0 asked, in faint alarm.
If we are discussing it now,
Kirumi spoke up, although a little hesitant.
Ryoma, I understand if you wish to avoid me. I see that I cannot help my people anymore.
Ryoma hummed. Nah, you don't have to go that far. I'd given up on life anyway.
Is that still the case?
Kirumi asked him. Not sure. Ryoma reached up for his hat, before seeming to remember that it wasn't there. Guess I've still got a ways to go. We're not letting you give up like that again, Kaito promised. And we're not letting you do anything stupid either, Kirumi. Future Foundation's taking care of the world now.
Who let a teenager run a country anyway?
Himiko agreed. Kirumi nodded slightly.
I see.
But, said Ryoma, drawing the maid's attention back to him, I'd like it if we weren't left alone together.
Understood.
Kirumi didn't look offended at all. In fact, it seemed like the tension in her shoulders had left.
Then I will continue to serve all of you to the best of my abilities. That is my selfless devotion.
We're gonna have to rein that in a bit, Kaito commented under his breath. But it's a good start. Great job, you two.
I'm so glad no one's holding any grudges.
Kaede breathed out a sigh of relief. She cast a brief look at Tenko, who was staring intently at Kyo.
Mostly. Anyway, I just hope we can all get along like we did before all of that happened.
The fuck you mean? Not holding any grudges? Hell yeah, I'm holding a grudge!
Mew barked, swiveling her glare towards Kokichi and Gonta.
What the hell was that supposed to be, you Shota cunt?
Gonta promptly burst into tears.
I have no idea what you're talking about,
Kokichi teased, completely ignoring the boy beside him.
Oh, wait. Are you talking about your little trap in the virtual world? When you tried to kill me?
You knew damn well what I was gonna do,
Mew shouted, banging her fists on the table.
Guys?
Kaede tried, but Shuichi stopped her. This was one of those things where you just had to let the storm ride out for it to dissipate. Gonta, so sorry, Mew! Gonta sobbed. Gonta wanted to save friends from horrible truth, and Gonta couldn't let Mew turn into murderer.
You're too much of a wimpy pussy for me to be mad at,
Mew snapped in her usual Mew-fashioned fluster.
Your dick's probably wimpy too, so shut it! It's Kokichi whose ass I'm gonna kick.
You tried to kill me first, Kokichi argued.
What I did was pretty much self-defense. You're lucky my legs don't work, Mew seethed. I'd come over there and shove my fist so far down your throat you'd be coughing up keratin for the rest of your life.
Your fist probably tastes like cum and oil, because being a filthy whore and making things is all you seem to be good for. Kokichi shot back defensively. Mew squeaked.
Filthy whore?
Never mind. Maybe this storm should be intervened with. I understand things are difficult between you three. Shuichi cut into the argument, asserting his voice enough to be heard by them. And it doesn't have to be okay right away. Or ever. What happened wasn't okay. And we can all agree what Kokichi did was absolutely terrible. But fighting about it like this isn't going to help.
He fucking killed me!
Mew shouted, violently jabbing her finger at Kokichi. He stuck his tongue out at her in response. And you were going to kill him first, Shuichi reminded her, as calmly as he could. Mew scoffed, crossing her arms. At least tone it down in front of Gonta. Shuichi all but pleaded. He feels bad enough as it is.
Yeah, the fighting is bad for our baby, Kokichi agreed. You can have him next week, but this week is mine. Huh? He's not a fucking kid. I'm on the pill,
Mew retorted, genuinely baffled. Well, that was probably as good as Shuichi was going to get. He let out a sigh as the two of them devolved into another argument, with even K1B0 getting involved, simultaneously trying to calm Gonta down and get Mew and Kokichi to quit fighting.
Wow, Shuichi, you've gotten super reliable,
Kaede commented, regarding him with an awestruck expression.
And you even took off your hat. You look great without it, Shuichi.
I'm sorry. He couldn't help but apologize to her. I tried to fulfill your wish. I really did.
Didn't you? We're all here now,
Kaede pointed out, gesturing to everyone. The atmosphere seemed less tense now, even if things were still rocky between a majority of them. Rantaro seemed to be the only one who didn't hold anything against his attempted killer.
It's not perfect, but it's a great start, isn't it? Everyone's getting along. All of us are happy. Soon enough, we're all going to be great friends, just like I wanted us to.
Shuichi looked around at all of his friends. Mew had separated into a conversation with K1B0, while Kokichi, Gonta, and Ryoma chatted. Angie, Tenko, and Himiko were all talking to each other. Kyo was quiet, but he seemed to be listening to the discussion between Kirumi, Maki, Kaito, and Rantaro.
We should join them,
Kaede suggested, eagerly taking his hand.
I want to catch up on what I missed. I want to know how the killing game ended. All my nurses told me was that one of you broke out of the simulation, and I'm dying to know who it was.
You can ask Kokichi, Shuichi suggested, pulling his hand back to himself. Sorry, this is overwhelming. I need to go. Concern flickered across Kaede's face.
Huh? Why?
I knew you were all alive. I knew you were going to be coming back, but... Shuichi helplessly trailed off. He thought this would be easier, but looking at her now, all he could remember was the way her suspended corpse had swayed midair. It's a lot, all at once. I'm sorry. I can't handle this.
Shuichi?
He really couldn't handle this. Shuichi's feet carried him out of the cafeteria as fast as he could physically manage. He really hadn't been prepared for this. It was like talking to a ghost. She could feed him as many fake words of positivity as she wanted, but he knew that deep down she was horrified She'd go back to her room and cry, knowing her death hadn't been justified, that the person she hurt forgave her, but she didn't actually kill him.
Everyone's getting along. All of us are happy.
So why wasn't he? Why wasn't Shuichi happy? He ended the killing game. He got the best case scenario, because all of his friends were back. So why? Why did he still feel so on edge? Was it because he felt that this could be ripped away from him at any moment? Was it the discomfort of knowing he was the one who investigated his classmates' dead bodies and then laid out the case of his other classmates' crimes? Was it because, if he had just put a little more thought into it, he could have exposed the mastermind and ended the killing game before anyone else had to die at all? It was so much. Overwhelming. Shuichi needed to do something with his hands. He needed to move. His feet carried him all the way to his own room. He closed the privacy curtain as soon as he could and pulled out his phone, pacing in small circles. He needed to write his feelings down. He needed to separate them from himself. It occurred to him later, when he was talking to his primary nurse, that he never got the chance to apologize to Kokichi. Pretty much everyone shouted at once.
What?
Are you serious? Kaede cried out, standing sharply from her seat and nearly toppling over. Why would he do that? Hell if I know, Kaito shouted back. I tried to argue with his nurse, but they wouldn't let me inside. Apparently it's against policy. But why would he do that? Maki wondered, and to Kokichi, she looked genuinely thrown off. Why would he ban visitors? He seemed fine when I talked to him. So as you could see, this morning was going great so far. It was the day after the first breakfast meeting, and Kaito had been the last one to arrive, immediately dominating the natural noise of the room. He had come with that significant, unfortunate news that Shuichi had banned visitors. Did anyone see him after he left the cafeteria yesterday? Kirumi asked, glancing around at their classmates. I tried, Kaede hesitantly admitted. I was going to ask him about what Kokichi told me yesterday. I thought he'd be okay if it was just the two of us, but when I went in... What Kokichi told you? Kaito echoed, already sounding skeptical. He told us how Shuichi ended the killing game. Ryoma thankfully came to his rescue. And I only messed with the truth a little, Kokichi added, masking his anxiety with a charming grin. I stayed true to Shuichi's tragic story. I just left out a few things. And one of those things were things that Kokichi wanted to let Shuichi share himself. Omitting details didn't necessarily make it a lie. It only simplified the truth. When Shuichi dashed out of the cafeteria, the last thing he was expecting was for Kaede to pull her seat right next to him. Shuichi said, "You can tell me about how the killing game ended?" was what she greeted him with. So don't lie to me. I want to know what actually happened. Ugh, can't you ask him yourself? Kokichi groaned. I don't wanna. Please? Kaede begged him, clasping her hands together. He looked like he trusted you a lot. His eyes went all soft. It was kind of cute in a way. Did you two get close or something? Maybe you worked together in some elaborate death traps? Like the death road of despair? Ryoma suggested. Kaede nodded vigorously. Yeah, that. Gonta curious too. Gonta offered as well. Kokichi rolled his eyes. There Shuichi went again, dropping trust and responsibility on his head. It was gross, and he needed to stop that before Kokichi started making even more noticeable goo-goo eyes at him. He was the cold-hearted, ultimate supreme leader of evil Kokichi Oma. He couldn't be fawning over some guy who spoke softly and had the prettiest eyelashes, and his hands were gentle, and his lips were so delicate, and that's not the point. Shuichi had been avoiding him as of late, though. Whenever Kokichi tried to talk to him, he always looked sad or uncomfortable. In fact, at times he even looked offended. Kokichi didn't know what that was about, but since it sounded like Shuichi didn't totally hate him, he was on board with this. How the killing game ended, Kokichi mused in mock thoughtfulness. All right, I guess I remember a few things. So, how much do you know?
Not much,
Kaede admitted, with a frustrated huff.
I just know someone managed to leave the simulation and called Future Foundation to help everyone.
Well, the guy who did that was actually Shuichi, Kokichi told her. He's pretty humble, I know.
Shuichi did that?
The pianist gasped, her eyes blown wide, as she looked at the cafeteria doorway.
He never told me that.
How'd he do it? Asked Ryoma. Breaking out of the simulation. He'd have to know something was up. Oh, that. Yeah, he just got into a bit of a time loop. Kokichi inspected his nails disinterestedly, though he was doing his best not to laugh at the mind-boggled expression Kaede was giving him. I died, and Monokuma didn't know who did it, so the whole simulation totally broke. Time loop? Gonta echoed dubiously. Time go in loop? A time loop is when someone repeats a certain period of time over and over, Ryoma explained to him. Gonta looked mortified. Over and over? Like, if Gonta wake up tomorrow, and tomorrow is today? Time don't work like that!
It was a simulation,
Kaede mused, though she still looked troubled.
Pretty much anything can happen. But why Shuichi?
I always assumed it was because of his protagonist powers, Kokichi joked. But, logically, it was probably because he had nothing to do with the original murder case. Samuki was the mastermind. K1B0 and Himiko were screwing around in the exosol hangar. Maki attacked me, Kaito killed me, and I died. No one else left but Shuichi. Kaito do what? Gonta cried out in horror, earning a questioning look from the astronaut on the other side of the table. Long story short, I was trying to end the killing game, so I pretended to be the mastermind, and I kidnapped Kaito and destroyed everyone's will to exist. Kokichi glossed over his original plan as quickly as he could. But then, Maki screwed it up, so I had Kaito kill me after destroying the electrical signals everywhere, so Monokuma wouldn't know who the culprit was. That's not important, though, because Shuichi got everyone out with no casualties. I don't remember dying even once. Ryoma was giving him that half-lidded, knowing stare. Kokichi tried his best not to sneer at him.
Okay, wait.
Kaede massaged her temples, squeezing her eyes shut in focus.
So you had Kaito kill you, and Monokuma didn't know?
I got my hands on these fun little things called an electro bomb, Kokichi told her gleefully. You don't need to know the details. The important part is that Shuichi used the time loop to not only stop Maki from attacking me and Kaito from killing me, but he also used it to stop the killing game altogether. He figured out who the actual mastermind was. And then, apparently the whole simulation bugged out, and he ended up on a different map or something. Jabberwock Island or whatevs. He and Monokuma teamed up, and that's when he learned about the simulation. How Kokichi know all this? I'm getting there, Kokichi assured him patiently. So, when he got back from his island vacation, he made up this whole plan to end everything. When Maki was interrogating me, Shuichi stormed into the hangar. And guess what? He held us all at gunpoint. Nearby, Kyo choked on his drink. What? Shuichi got a gun? Kaede gasped. How? Wait, Shuichi can use a gun? He was pretty scary with it, too, Kokichi informed her. Seeing him yell at Kaito and Maki was pretty funny. He locked them in the bathroom. This all happened in the exosol hangar, by the way. It had a bathroom. He locked them in there, and you'll never guess what he did to me. 3 expectant gazes met his. Guess, he urged them. He tell you everything that happened? Gonta tried. He shot you? Was Ryoma's darker suggestion. Did he lock you in the hangar? Kaede offered. Wrong! He drugged me, handcuffed me, and took me prisoner, Kokichi announced, with pure delight. The looks on their faces was so worth the theatrics. He wanted just a little more information out of Monokuma, who I had trapped with the exosouls. At this point, he was being all tragic and mysterious, so I knew he was never going to actually hurt me.
Did you say he drugged you? Ryoma pointed out.
He didn't hurt me, though, Kokichi protested. He won't try that again. He knows better. Anyway, me and him decided to put on a little show, so to speak. He used me as leverage to get the information he wanted out of Monokuma, and when he did, we blew him up and went to Shuichi's room together.
You blew up Monokuma?
Kaede yelled. Isn't that against the school rules? It was needed to stop the time loop, so Monokuma was cool with it. At least, that's what Kokichi had interpreted, anyway. Monokuma's last words had been pretty ominous. After he said goodbye and some really cheesy crap like, let's be more than friends if we meet again, blah, I fell asleep. And when I woke up, he was gone. Just like that. Kaede suddenly seized him by the shoulders, and the only reason he didn't automatically punch her was because his arms were tired. He didn't like being grabbed, thanks.
He said that to you?
Kaede demanded, with virtual stars in her eyes.
Did he really?
Sort of. Kokichi cringed away from her. His exact words are traumatized into my memory. He said, quote, all I hope is that when this is all over and everyone is finally safe, we can be friends. Or maybe something more like that. Why? Are you jealous? Are you gonna go psycho and start killing everyone close to him?
What? No!
Kaede jerked her hands away from him, and it occurred to him that murder may still be a touchy subject for her. He'd have to reel in those jokes a bit.
I was just super intrigued. I didn't know Shuichi was the romantic type.
Kokichi habitually slammed a blank look on his face. Romantic? He asked, keeping his voice blank.
Obviously. He was asking you on a date,
Kaede exclaimed.
He must have been so unsure of himself. He wanted to tell you how he felt in case he never got to see you again.
The notion was so outlandish, Kokichi almost laughed. He played off his feelings for Shuichi as a joke, because he knew there was no way they'd ever be reciprocated. Who would ever love him in that way in the first place? Certainly not Shuichi. Hadn't he been making puppy eyes at Kaede? When would he have switched up?
I don't know what it is I feel towards you, but it isn't hate. Never hate.
Oh, wait a minute.
I'm really happy you're awake.
Well, all he's done since we got here is avoid me, so if he does want to ask me out, he's pretty bad at it. Kokichi snorted, frantically taking all of those complicated emotions and placing them into a tight ball and launching them into the metaphorical sun. He keeps looking at me like I killed his dog or something.
Not sure how any of you managed to fall in love with someone in something like a killing game, Ryoma commented. Teenagers will be teenagers, I guess. Isn't Ryoma teen as well?
Gonta pointed out.
Ryoma shrugged. I'm a little older, but yeah, I'm still a teenager.
Back on track. I woke up, and Shuichi was gone. Kokichi stubbornly continued. He left behind this really in-depth note explaining everything that happened to him in the time loop, and telling us who the actual mastermind was. While I was sleeping, he apparently blew up part of the end wall, but because the simulation was already breaking, the morning announcement just fixed the hole, so all of us were stuck there. Then we all woke up here. So that's basically how Shuichi ended the killing game.
Wait, but what did Shuichi do in those time loops? Kaede asked. And how did he know Tsumugi was the mastermind?
For a moment, Kokichi did consider telling her. The others probably would without thinking for a second about it. Shuichi had shared this knowledge with them, so where's the harm in spreading it? No, Kokichi wouldn't believe that so easily. Shuichi may have shared his experiences with them in his parting letter, but Kokichi didn't care about that. His focus was placed on Shuichi's intent. The letter had been left behind as an explanation, and Shuichi had said so himself, that he didn't think anyone would believe him. He only used the horrors he went through in that time loop as a point of argument. The circumstances he was in forced him to do so. It wasn't that he trusted them to safely open up about his experience. Quite the opposite, in fact. He had only written all of that out as a last-ditch, desperate effort to convince them that he was being honest, that the suffering, the torment he had gone through, was real. Kokichi didn't have any place to be sharing Shuichi's business with these guys. That wouldn't be fair to him. "Sorry, that one's classified," Kokichi teased instead. "You'll have to ask him yourself. It was so boring to read. I've already blocked it out of my memory." "What? That's not very considerate," Kaede huffed.
"Nah, I just think he doesn't want to tell us," said Ryoma. "That's it, isn't it?"
"Actually, Shuichi threatened to muzzle me if I told anyone." Kokichi shuddered as hard as he could. "He was super mean about it, too."
"But Gonta thought Kokichi doesn't remember Shuichi's story."
Gonta crossed his arms, his brows furrowed, deep in thought. "Yeah, I'm just lying. Actually, it's information protected by this super reliable organization. It's Keter, you know." Kokichi tapped his chin. "What was it called? Secure, contain, something. You know what? I'll ask him myself," Kaede decided. "Honestly, Kokichi, you make everything so confusing all the time." Kokichi only offered her a grin. "I know." "Which is what I want to talk to Shuichi about," Kaede verified, pulling him back to reality. She gnawed on her nails, looking almost impressively worried. "But when I went into his room, he was typing on a phone with a really unnerving expression. He didn't even notice me come in, and I didn't want to interrupt him."
Yikes. Shuichi must have taken breakfast really bad yesterday, if he was that out of it then. Though Shuichi couldn't blame him. He had felt his heart drop out of his chest when he saw Gonta up and about. "Phone?" Rantaro echoed inquisitively.
"Future Foundation gave it to him," Maki answered for him. "It's pretty special to him. But more importantly, why would he ban visitors? I thought he wanted to reunite with everyone."
He did blow up on Kaito pretty easily,
Himiko reminded.
Maybe he's just not emotionally prepared for us yet.
"Then cutting us off is counterproductive," Kaito snapped. "Damn it, I told him not to shoulder everything on his own."
Kokichi was just as lost as they were. Why would Shuichi close himself off? He doesn't usually isolate himself like this. Then again, he was in a time loop. Self-isolation is all he did for, half of it.
"I'm gonna try and fix this," Kaito continued talking. "I can't let my sidekick do stupid shit that's going to harm him."
"What are you, in love with him?"
Mew snorted.
"Who gives a shit if he's locked himself up? I'll be back in a few days. Just watch."
Atue says leaving Shuichi on his own will lead to unfortunate consequences,
Enji inputted. "I don't think harassing him is going to make him feel better," Rantaro pointed out. "I heard something about a time loop and how he ended the killing game. Maybe he just needs some time alone."
"But going as far as to ban visitors? Couldn't he just tell us he needed time?"
Kaede fretted.
Kokichi jerked his head towards the robot.
"Keyboy did it."
"I banned visitors because I was corrupted for yours and my safety," K1B0 corrected him. "I just wanted to ensure Team Danganronpa hadn't made me a threat before I rejoined you all."
"Have you considered that you're a threat to society in general?" Kokichi suggested. "Or, at least what's left of it. Maybe the final stage of the apocalypse is a robo-uprising."
"The legal system may have collapsed, but mark my words, I will rebuild it, and I will sue you for your robophobia,"
K1B0 declared with unadulterated determination.
Like a robo-lawyer,
mused Himiko.
Let's give him a day or two, Maki suggested. If he's not back then, we can bring up our concerns to the nurses. They probably won't endorse self-isolation. Are you sure? I mean, what if he hurts himself?
Kaede worried. They always say it gets worse before it gets better. Rantaro shrugged. Some of us handle things better alone. He'll process everything that happened, then come back to us when he's ready.
But banning visitors is pretty out of character. Kokichi tried not to let it show on his face just how worried he was. Wasn't there a big moral lesson about not doing things alone? He talked to me about wanting to see us again. That was his whole thing when he was saying bye to me. So, if he was so excited before, why did he switch up? This would have been like the best case scenario for him. What could he possibly be thinking? What their lives were like after the tragedy and before the killing game were things that the Future Foundation refused to disclose. The only clues they had were their bodies. For Kokichi, his clues came in the form of hurt. His stomach hurt whenever he ate, and his body was weak and thin. But that was because he was dangerous being malnutritioned. All he had heard was that he was starved, and he had made up plenty of theories about that. Overexerting himself would lead to a pinched ache in his back, where there had apparently been some big wound that no one had cared to treat before. It would scar, but he didn't care that much. Really, he didn't. It was just something that permanently altered his body forever, and he had no way of ever getting rid of it, which was fine. Totally. That was what his therapist had politely attempted to bring up. Yep, you heard it here. Kokichi Oma got a therapist. Absolutely unbelievable, he knows. Future Foundation wanted him to make a conscious effort to get better, whatever that was supposed to mean.
So, you're unhappy with not knowing what happened before the killing game?
His therapist had guessed.
I'm overjoyed,
he had deadpanned.
I can tell,
they replied dryly, matching his tone almost perfectly. At least they had a sense of humor, he figured.
I've heard you're a tough cookie. So, we're going to take this slow.
Slow?
Yep, slow. Unless you want to go at lightning speed.
Ooh, lightning round. Hit me with it, Mr. Miss Therapist. I'll answer anything, so long as I get something sweet after.
I'll see what I can do, but all right, prepare yourself.
He had prepared. Hard. As much as the idea of sharing his feelings with a total stranger utterly disgusted him, even Kaito was meeting with one of the two therapists Future Foundation had to spare for all of them. And if Kokichi was anything, it was spiteful. Heaven knows all of Dice had encouraged him to find one when he was older back then. So, if the thought of beating Kaito at therapy was what drove him to attend, then he wasn't going to back down from the challenge. So, what was he doing now? Not with his therapist. Well, we'll start small. They had flipped down a few pages on their, quite frankly, massive notepad. It was almost comical.
You can always recover from malnutrition, but it sounds like that scar isn't going away. I've heard you're the thoughtful type. So, do you have any ideas on how that could have got there?
Ideas? Actually, I have one.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. Let me get my notes. You're gonna love this. This theory I call Magic Escape Act. Kokichi did want to try therapy. The keyword was try. And, in his defense, no, he was not running away. He was playing hard to get. Usually I can run longer. He grumbled under his breath, glaring down at his legs. They didn't carry him very far, which sucked. Usually, he could run all the way around the school without getting this tired.
It looked like he had arrived at the entrance to the recreation room, and he could hear voices inside. Peeking inside, he saw Kaede, Kaito, Kirumi, Gonta, and Maki inside, two of the less tolerable people, but Gonta and Kaede being there made up for it, he supposed. Besides, it would be the perfect cover. Kaito and Kaede seemed to be in some conversation, while Gonta was reading some book to Kirumi, who appeared a little interested at least. Maki was kind of brooding in the corner, nearby, but not contributing to anything. Hopefully, she'd keep her presence to the minimum of glaring at him.
Did that?
Kaede was saying, her eyes sparkling. Yeah, he did. With my help, of course, Kaito told her, with his big, stupidly positive grin. He didn't let his enemies overcome him, and that makes him really strong. It's your wish that inspired him to push himself.
I thought it was you who did that.
Kokichi inserted himself into the conversation. Ah! Kaito jumped at the sound of his voice, and surprise automatically turned into sourness when he saw him. Oh, it's you.
Hi, Kokichi.
Kaede greeted him kindly.
Kaito was telling me about how far Shuichi came after I, was gone.
Ah, Shuichi. It had been a few days after he had locked himself up, and no one had seen him since. Kaito had gotten into trouble for banging at his door for 15 minutes straight. But other than that, there were no updates. Kokichi was about ready to lockpick his way inside.
Well, I wouldn't listen to Kaito about the numbers,
Kokichi warned her.
He'll inflate the number like crazy, just like how he inflates his ego. Aren't you supposed to be getting counseling or something?
Maki grumbled before Kaito could retort.
That? Oh, I finished that. I'm a changed man now,
Kokichi effortlessly replied.
I beat the final boss in therapy and won. So, now I'm top of the speedrun charts. There's a speedrunning category for therapy?
Kaede asked, momentarily looking thoughtful.
I just made one,
Kokichi told her cheerily. He plopped down on the couch next to her, grinning wildly.
So, what are we all doing today, everybody? Are we finally going to beat Kaito to death with a broom? Hey, Kirumi!
Sitting on the ground near the bookshelf behind them, Kirumi looked up. We're not beating anyone to death with a broom, Kaito shouted. Quit saying such unpleasant shit when we're having a normal conversation.
And don't threaten to kill people,
Maki added darkly from her corner.
What are you, my parents?
Kokichi snorted.
I'll threaten whoever I want. I am the ultimate supreme leader of evil.
They should change that to the ultimate supreme killjoy, Kaito growled.
Do you think they'll let us duct tape his mouth shut?
Kaede wondered.
Hey, now you're teaming up on me too?
Kokichi gasped in offense, touching his chest.
What is this? The Dark Ages? Where we all pick on sad, little innocent orphan boys? Why are you sad? I thought you'd be therapy,
Maki pointed out.
Also, you're far from innocent. You're right, I'm actually the son of a really rich family, Kokichi lied. How else could you think I got my secret organization's matching outfits tailored?
Maki lifted an eyebrow.
Your secret organization has matching outfits? It's called presentation. Not that you would know that, being an assassin.
Kokichi sneered at her. He was pretty sure he came this close to getting throttled by Maki. The only reason his neck remained untouched was because Kaede shot him a bewildered look.
Wait, what? Maki's a what?
Whoops! He forgot that big plot twist wasn't known among their entire group.
Oh, you didn't know?
Kokichi quickly stood up from the couch, suddenly needing to remove himself from the conversation. Outing Maki like that was going to make specifically 2 people in this room very mad, so he should probably start running as soon as possible.
Yeah, Maki's a cold-hearted killer. Crazy how you never knew her actual talent, right?
One more word out of you, and I'm clocking you 6 ways from Sunday, Kaito snarled dangerously, which paired perfectly with the death glare Maki was giving him. A match made in heaven, really. And also a match who maybe Wanted him dead. What does that even mean? Kokichi snorted. Well, I'm going to 6 ways myself out of this room before that therapist person catches up. Glad I could spread my positive influence. The minute he saw Kaito's hands ball into a fist, he was out of there. The break, at least, gave his legs time to recover, so he hurried his way to the cafeteria. Maybe some of his other classmates would be there that hated him a little less. Or Mew would be there. He was pretty mad at her for getting him scolded by Shuichi, but he guessed that she deserved to be a little mad at him. He did get her killed, after all, even though it was Gonta who agreed to the whole plan. Gonta knew exactly what he was doing when he strangled the life out of her, and no one was blaming him. Well, whatever. No matter how annoying it was to watch his classmates baby Gonta, it didn't matter. No more killing game meant there was no more need for such heavy conflict. So, he'd have to lighten up and get along with everyone, even if he was pretty sure a majority of his classmates disliked him, and the other half were afraid of him. Mew and Maki probably wanted him in the ground. Himiko was undeniably scared of him, and Kaito, he was pretty sure Kaito was a mix of both. K1B0 remained as civil as Kokichi would let him, and Shuichi?
Obviously, he was asking you on a date. He must have been so unsure of himself. He wanted to tell you how he felt in case he never got to see you again.
Was trying to avoid him as much as possible. Is it guilt? Kokichi wondered as he entered the cafeteria. Rantaro was there with Himiko and Tenko, talking idly and not noticing his arrival. Does he feel bad for what he did to me? Is it because I told him he could leave when I woke up? He seemed pretty butthurt about it, but I thought he'd be more reasonable than that. That's totally not a reason to avoid me. Who knows? Maybe he just hates me now. I'm really happy you're awake, Kokichi. Hate wouldn't make sense, though. Shuichi didn't look at him with disdain. He just looked hurt. When Kokichi tried to conversationally play with him as usual, he was quiet, his expression twitching, as if he was trying not to look too sad, but also as if he didn't really know what to do with himself. The change in attitude, as far as Kokichi could tell, had happened when he woke up. He had come to fully find Shuichi holding his wrist and gently explaining the situation to him. Then, because Kokichi didn't want any company at that moment, he told Shuichi he could leave. He thought he had made it clear that it was just an in-the-moment thing, so he wasn't sure how anyone could have misinterpreted that. And once again, Shuichi plagued his mind. He let out a sigh, turning to look at the group on the other side of the room. Tenko was talking loudly to Himiko, while Rantaro just looked tired. He had his hand on his head, propped up against the tabletop, as he simply gazed at the 2 girls, entirely idle. Maybe he could bother them without getting a hand chopped into his throat. Odds were slim, but hey, no one ever said he didn't like to gamble. Hey, Kokichi. Kokichi looked up from the coloring book he had been brutalizing with many different colors of crayon, forcing his swinging feet to stop. Never expected to see you here, Rantaro stated, sitting down on the floor beside him. What are you up to? I'm expressing my artistic side in this notebook Mr. Therapist gave me, Kokichi told him cheerfully. I'm what they call a flight risk in the industry. That's about what I expected, Rantaro sighed fondly. I know. I'm glad someone has finally taken notice. Kokichi laid down his crayon, sitting upright. This is a secret I haven't told anyone else, but I was actually born with wings. They called me Tenshi at my birth before they realized I was a freak of human nature and sawed my wings off. I see. That's a real shame. Rantaro shot a thoughtful look at his back, as if he were trying to visualize what his wings would have looked like. But I'm pretty sure that's not the truth, is it? Kokichi grinned.
Nope! It'll be a cold day in hell when humans start growing wings, even if it would be really cool. But imagine the societal pressure that put on us. Our wings could be clipped. The government would restrict us from flying, so we don't get hit by airplanes. We'd have to remodel every chair that isn't a stool.
Yeah, that'd be troublesome, Rantaro sighed. If we had wings, our bodies would also have to adjust to being able to handle things like high air pressure and low oxygen levels. Otherwise, wings would pretty much be just cosmetic.
Man can only dream, Kokichi lamented. Anyway, why are you bothering me during my art therapy? I have competition, you know.
Competition in therapy? Rantaro guessed, appearing briefly stumped before he wisely decided to move on. Well, I actually came to give you something.
Give me something? What could there possibly be for Rantaro to give him? It had only been like a week since Kokichi was given free roam of the hospital wing they were in, and he tried every possibility of entertainment already. Ooh, free things? Kokichi inquired in delight. Whatever it was something given to him by someone who he didn't piss off with everything he said and did, so he'd gladly accept it.
Sorry, I phrased that wrong. Rantaro corrected himself sheepishly. Shuichi asked me to give you something.
Oh, now that was a way to take him by surprise. Shuichi? You mean no visitors allowed, Shuichi? Kokichi clarified, and he'd be lying if he said he wasn't at least a little shocked. Shuichi had been radio silent for 5 days since he locked himself up? What could possibly make him emerge from his shell now?
Yep, he showed up at my door just now and told me to give you this.
Rantaro reached into his pocket and fished out a cell phone.
Phone? The Future Foundation gave it to him. It's pretty special to him.
Believe me, I tried to ask him what he's been up to,
Rantaro told him as he took the delicate phone into his own hands.
But the more I asked, the more he looked like he was about to cry. All he did was apologize to me for being too late to save me.
The phone had a black, thick case, and it wasn't password protected. The only important app icons he could see on the home screen were the contacts, the phone, a notes app, and something labeled futurefoundation.gov/media archive. This must be how Shuichi stayed in contact with the heads of the Future Foundation, which might mean that he just gave Kokichi access to a very important device.
He also said that you were free to read his notes, and to not worry about invading his privacy,
Rantaro added, though he sounded hesitant.
My guess is that this is his way of reaching out. From what I've heard, he seems to like you quite a bit.
Is that all there is to it? Kokichi wondered as he opened the notes app. Holy crap! How much did he write in this thing?
Well, Rantaro lifted himself to his feet. I'll leave you to it then.
The first note was titled simply, To Koki. However, looking down, his note titles sent a nervous pang through his heart. Things like How It Felt to Kill Myself, Rantaro's Case, Koki's Mad, Samugi, The KG Survivors, I Want to Live, Time Loop, and it just continued on like that. A bitter emotion to feel, one that raised the hair on the back of his neck. Uncertainty. Hold on, Kokichi said to Rantaro, not taking his eyes off of the phone. This wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. Everything about the situation felt wrong. Just wait a sec. Although he looked confused, Rantaro obeyed. With his backup secured, Kokichi opened the note addressed to him. A few paragraphs greeted him. It read, The first time I called you Koki
was in the 14th time loop, when you were holding me in your lap and telling me to go to sleep. I never felt safer. I was so tired, I didn't even realize I didn't finish saying your name. And you said to me, "Koki, is Shuichi giving me pet names already?" The nickname stuck with me throughout the time loop, because it made me remember how safe I felt with you, how I felt like I could never be hurt if you were holding me. I wanted that to happen again. When you woke up, I was so excited. I was so happy that you were back. Maki was mad at me. Kiba wouldn't let anyone see him. So all I had at that moment was you. I don't know what I was expecting to happen. You punched me, and then told me to go away. I'm sorry for hurting you. I really am. I'm sorry for drugging you and pushing a gun into your head, and I'm sorry I let you die so many times. If I could redo it all over again, I promise I would have saved you sooner. You don't have to forgive me or talk to me again. I don't mind. I just want you to be happy. It's gonna be hard, I know, but the killing game is over. You can relax. You mean a lot to me, Kokichi. You're why I was in the time loop to begin with. And because of that, I ended the killing game. It was so scary and so painful, but I'm so happy I could save you. I want to say it now because I didn't get to before. I love you. It's so weird. I'm shaking while I'm typing this, which is so ridiculous because it doesn't matter. But at the same time, it does. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this to your face. You'd know something is wrong. I want to tell you I love you. I want to look you in your eyes while I do it because they're so pretty and they feel so safe. Koki, please, don't be mad at me anymore. Please don't blame yourself because it's not your fault. I trust you with my phone. You can read the other notes. I don't mind. I know you like to know things, so maybe this will help. I'm sorry for everything. Please, believe me. I love you, Kokichi. Kokichi felt rooted on the spot. It was as if ice flooded his veins. How long ago did he give you this? Kokichi demanded urgently, flying to his feet. Rantaro looked worried. About 10 minutes ago, maybe? Shit. Oh, shit. Do you know where he went? His room, but... Rantaro stopped, his eyes widening. He wouldn't really. That was all the answer he needed. The strained pain in his legs didn't matter, nor did the ache that his panic caused in his chest. What mattered was Shuichi, and getting there before he did something stupid. When Shuichi had banned visitors, this was a possibility that had crossed Kokichi's mind. He knew Shuichi was already having a tough time between dealing with what happened in the time loop, apparently what happened in the clinic, and the killing game overall. So when you mix someone like that with total isolation, it was never going to end well. Kokichi pretty much slammed face first into Shuichi's door. He fumbled with the doorknob, expecting it to be locked. But much to his surprise, the door swung wide open. He exchanged the briefest of looks with Rantaro before he hurried into the room. Shuichi, please let me be wrong. Please, please, please. The lights were off, and the privacy curtain was closed, so the room was very dim. But no matter how dark the room could have been, he would never miss it. The person on the floor, kitchen knife in hand. How he had gotten it, Kokichi couldn't be sure. But he hardly cared about that, compared to the blood all over the floor. Shuichi Saihara, laying on his side, with his wrists slit open. There was so much blood. He thought the past murders were bad, but no, this was worse. Indefinitely worse, because the blood was forming a puddle beneath him, and his coat and shirt were soaked in it. It was fresh, mere minutes old, every cut on his arm, his neck. It poured out endlessly, and he was dying. Oh God. Shuichi was dying. It took a while for everything to settle. The cafeteria had been closed off entirely as the kitchen was inspected. The lock to the door had apparently been broken. One of the knives was missing. All of those were quickly moved far out of their reach. Of course, not everyone knew why this was. No one even asked. Right now, what happened was his and Rantaro's little secret. Around midnight, he and Rantaro had spoken to a lady named Aoi Asahina, who had rushed to the scene as fast as she could. Shuichi was still being treated and monitored at this time, but they told him he could go in when he was stabilized. They dropped Shuichi's ban on visitors, but only far too late. For a hospital, they did a pretty poor job of watching him, especially when they literally had nurses whose jobs were to keep an eye on their patients. Well, it's not like Kokichi could blame them. It wasn't like anyone could have seen this coming. Shuichi's primary nurse was also apparently Muse, who needed a lot more constant supervision. It was easy to assume Shuichi wasn't, or rather, couldn't, hurt himself. Besides, the time loop had made Shuichi a slippery actor, a walking lie, masked with a desire to get better. Kokichi did believe he wanted to. His notes proved that. But when you do things alone for so long, when you are alone for that long, it isn't easy to flip right back around and depend on others again. Things just don't work like that. Kokichi should have noticed sooner, because he was having the same problem. Both he and Shuichi had put on acts to protect their problems from ever being unburied, but where Kokichi had used that act to join his classmates, Shuichi had used it to hide himself further away. Once they told that Aoi lady what they knew, she let him keep Shuichi's phone. It was Shuichi's after all, and the last thing Shuichi had done was give it to him. She simply told him to give it back when Shuichi woke up, because from the sounds of how he used it, he was going to need it again. Both he and Rantaro waited outside of Shuichi's room pretty much all night. Neither of them went back to their own rooms. Rantaro simply fell asleep in his chair, and by extension, Kokichi eventually did as well. But the kinks in his neck and the pain in his back were hardly anything he paid much attention to. What he cared about was Shuichi. Now, it was morning, and time for the everyday breakfast meeting. Pretty much all of their nurses encouraged it from a mental health standpoint, though their doctors warned them to be very careful when exerting themselves. "We're gonna have to tell them," Rantaro murmured to him on their way to the cafeteria, which had reopened this morning. "I know," Kokichi grumbled. Rantaro was guiding him as he walked, seeing his eyes were glued onto Shuichi's phone. His time loop note was long, that's for sure. "Maki will probably think I tried to kill him." "Come on now, Maki's sensible," Rantaro assured him, and he snorted. "Most of the time. Just try not to be too antagonistic, all right? If you have the urge to say something, write it down on that phone. I'm sure Shuichi wouldn't mind." "What? So I'm banned from talking? Well, everything that comes out of your mouth tends to be pretty angering, Rentaro pointed out coolly. You're pretty fond of provoking people, and with this kind of news, we need the opposite of that. Damn it, that was true. He hummed. Can I cry? Maybe, if I tell them about Shuichi's almost dead body, they won't choke me. Let's not do that. Rantaro disapproved. You can cry, but try to keep the details to a minimum, all right? If I was in Shuichi's situation, I wouldn't want anyone talking about how I looked half dead. But he was mostly dead. You get my point. He did. He was just trying to feel as if the mood were lighter than it really was. Rentaro patted him encouragingly on the back, just before they entered the cafeteria, where pretty much everyone, aside from their usual two, was waiting. Sumugi was missing for obvious reasons, and while Shuichi usually didn't attend because he was self-isolating, now he couldn't. Try to get through this unproblematically, he reminded himself, staring down at Shuichi's written words on the screen. You're not staying for long anyway, so don't purposefully infuriate anyone. Don't unpurposefully infuriate anyone. Just talk like a normal person whose friend, boy crush, just tried to kill themselves. Actually, what would a normal person do? What would everyone in DICE do? Probably something a lot more sensible than he could ever think of. Pissing people off when he was stressed was his whole thing. How was he going to get through this? Maybe Rantaro was right. Keeping his mouth shut might be the relatively better option. Hey, everyone. Rantaro greeted their classmates, effectively capturing their attention. Hey, Rantaro! Damn! Kaito exclaimed, jerking out of his chair in surprise. What happened to you two? Your faces...
Your face is irreparable and disgusting, but you don't see me crying about it. Kokichi's mouth automatically retaliated. He bit his tongue and grinded his teeth, refusing to look at Kaito. Or anyone at all, really. Was that you trying to have self-control? Rantaro asked, sounding only mildly amused, as Kaito shouted in outrage. He was so easy to rile up. Kokichi just couldn't resist. Don't pay him any mind, Kaito. It's been a hard night.
Hard? Mew demanded haughtily. Like, hard? What the fuck were you two getting up to? Ooh, this was so much harder than he thought it'd be. These people were just asking for it. But, just this once, for the sake of delivering difficult news on Shuichi's behalf, he'd make a conscious effort to not be a jerk. He could leave once they dropped the news bomb. Hang on. He could feel Maki's glare intensify from her place next to Kaito as she spoke. Is that Shuichi's phone? Where did you get that? Well, I actually... Rantaro's hand flew to cover his mouth. Whatever he was about to say isn't true. Shuichi gave it to him. He gave Kokichi his phone? Kaito echoed dubiously. Why would he do that? Kirumi wondered. You guys didn't know? Shuichi really likes Kokichi. Kaede, as optimistic as ever, exclaimed. It makes sense he would share something valuable to him with the person he likes. Likes? Angie repeated. What type of like are we talking about? Is it a hard night type of like? Mew inquired, a wide grin on her face. And you boys know what I'm talking about. Don't act dumb. I know just how easily you get your rocks off on everything, even each other. Must you be so vulgar while we are trying to eat? Korekio asked her dryly. Hard night means difficult night. Gonta mused, ignoring Mew's eccentricities. Rantaro and Kokichi have difficult night? Are Rantaro and Kokichi okay? We'll manage. Rantaro responded after a moment. We do have some pretty bad news, though. So, we need you to bear with us.
Kokichi pulled Rantaro's hand away from his mouth. Bear with him? I'm opting out of this conversation before all of Shuichi's other boyfriends and girlfriends try to kill me.
One, Shuichi isn't dating anyone, Kaito corrected him. And two, is Shuichi all right?
He's in mint condition, Kokichi deadpanned.
Oh boy. So, yesterday, you remember how the cafeteria closed all of a sudden? Rantaro prompted, following their classmate's affirmation. He continued, and a ton of doctors got really busy pretty much out of nowhere. Well, that was because of Shuichi. He told me to give Kokichi his phone. And then he attempted suicide. He nearly killed himself.
The room went dead silent. Though it was quiet, Kokichi could see their expressions. Shock, disbelief, grief, and horror were all present, even among those who were usually more composed, like Maki and Korekio. Those closer to Shuichi, like Kaede, Kaito, and Maki, all looked as if he had just announced Shuichi's untimely death, while everyone else appeared to be stunned.
You're kidding, right?
Kaede finally choked out, breaking the tense spell of silence.
I wish I was, Rantaro sighed grimly. He almost bled to death. Kokichi realized what he intended to do, which is the only reason why he's alive right now.
Kokichi kept his eyes down on the darkened phone screen. Shuichi had avoided giving it to him directly, because he knew that Kokichi would catch on immediately. He went out of his way to ask Rantaro to do it, who knew the least about him and his tells, and thus would be less likely to notice something dangerously off. Even then, he had still managed to stop him, and the door was unlocked when I got there.
But why?
Himiko spoke, her voice weak. Tenko immediately wrapped her arm around her and let the smaller girl lean into her side, which she seemed to gladly comply to.
Why would Shuichi do that? We were finally okay, weren't we? Isn't this what he wanted?
We were okay, K1B0 corrected her. Shuichi clearly was not. Don't you remember how he shouted at Kaito during our first morning meeting? He was snappy and quick to be defensive. Something was clearly wrong. I thought it was because he thought I was mad at him, Maki inputted. I apologized to him, and he apologized to me, so I thought that'd be the end of it. There was more on his mind, though,
Kirumi stated for her. Did he give either of you any reason? Ryoma questioned, as in, why he did it, or what triggered him to do it.
For the first time, Kokichi was okay with keeping quiet. He had his guesses as to what the final push could have been, but he couldn't know for sure until Shuichi told him himself. As for why, that probably felt obvious. The time loop, Kokichi stated. Obviously, that's why. And oh, maybe it's the fact that he survived a killing game? And not only that, but it's the survivor's guilt that he had that blew up in his face because everyone who died is back all of a sudden.
Kaito looked furious. Are you saying that's a bad thing?
Nope, I'm pretty happy about it, and I know Shuichi is too, Kokichi said with full confidence. That's probably why he felt so bad about it.
When he ran away from that morning meeting, he said he wasn't able to handle it, and that it was overwhelming.
Kaede mused anxiously.
I thought he just needed a moment. Then he blocked off visitors. I never thought he'd do that to himself. I should have followed him.
Blaming yourself isn't going to help. Rantaro thankfully called her out. I was the last person he came to before he attempted. So if you didn't notice, then I absolutely should have.
But I'm not going to blame myself, because that's not what he needs right now.
Exactly. Blaming yourself is just going to make him feel worse, Maki agreed. More guilt is the last thing Shuichi needs.
Okay. Sorry. I get it.
Kaede perked up, her somber demeanor transforming into something more determined.
Shuichi needs us, so we can't let ourselves be down. Let's work out what we can do for him when he wakes up. Try to make him as comfortable as possible.
And yep, this is where Kokichi was going to take his leave. He came to deliver the news, not to listen to everyone pretend they knew what Shuichi did and didn't want. He especially didn't want to be involved in the questions about the time loop that were inevitably going to be asked. With that in mind, he turned on his heel and began to leave the cafeteria. Kokichi, are you heading back? Rantaro asked him before he could fully leave. He didn't have to say a word for Rantaro to know. All right then, take it easy. Ew, was Rantaro worried about him? One could say that finding someone you cared about bleeding to death on the floor was inherently a traumatic experience, but Rantaro wasn't his therapist. That honor went to the poor person, who he had pretty much perfected playing hide-and-seek with. They had the patience of a saint, he'd tell you that. Either way, he gave Rantaro a nod, leaving the cafeteria before anyone could stop him. What triggered Shuichi to do such a thing wasn't in his main concerns. Why was definitely a factor to be taken into consideration, but what Kokichi was focused most on was stopping Shuichi from ever getting to that point again. He had clearly tried to stop it on his own, too. Every note he wrote was to release his emotions into word form, sealing it in one little app. The problem came with the fact that Shuichi tried to do it alone. Shuichi explained it across many notes. He forbade visitors because the time loop had made loneliness a comfort to him. When things became too much to bear, Shuichi always tried to bury that feeling. He tried so hard to separate it from himself, to move past it, because there was a greater goal at hand, and his friends needed him. Once that goal was complete, and the threat was gone, what was left for him? The quest of getting better? Shuichi did not know how to do that. Not on his own. So, Shuichi needed a bit of help. And even if Kokichi wasn't sure how he could do that yet, he'd try. He'd try his best for the boy who tried his hardest to save him from himself. And for the boy he loves. You know?